everyone. Hi,
Hello.
Marilyn. Hi, Naveen. Hi, Marcia. Hi, Nupur. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the Coacharya Trainers Showcase webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you're joining in, let us know where in the world you're joining us from. As you know, you would know, this is part of the Coacharya Trainers Showcase series webinar. And today's topic of discussion is promoting client autonomy. We have a panel of coaches with us today. We have Tracy with us, we have Komal with us, and we have Richa. All three of them are coaches, and they will be discussing client autonomy, how it goes about in a coaching session. But before they begin the discussion, I would just like to announce that currently, as you know, we're celebrating 30 years of ICF at Coacharya, and we are currently offering discounts across all our ICF accredited programs. So any program, ACC, PCC, MCC, ACTC, which is ICF accredited, you are going to get discounts on those programs. So get in touch with our team today, and you can reach out to us at support@coacharya.com. And you can, if you have any questions or if you want a free consultation with a team member who can, guide you through the process of coach training, how it works, which program is best for you, do reach out to us. And there is also an ACTC program which is going to start really soon with Cindy and Smita. So if anybody is interested in, signing up for this, please do check out the link in the chat box, which I will be pasting shortly. So that is all from my side, and I will pass it on to Tracy now, who will be taking over. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today as we discuss a topic that's very close to my heart. And we're talking about client autonomy. So the ICF core competencies include language about autonomy, specifically under competency 8. And yet, just because that's the competency it's listed under doesn't mean that it only matters at the close of a session. It's actually something that we support as coaches. We support it, we promote it throughout the entire process. And today we're going to talk about why that matters, how it shows up in a coaching session, how it doesn't show up, and also how we can all work on holding that space to promote autonomy more within coaching. But before we get into any of that, I'd love to hear from you. And so if you can pop into the chat, and I'll actually put this question in here for you. Give me one moment as I navigate technology. Thank you. And yes, so here we are. So take off, I want to invite you each to take off your coaching hat for a moment and think about this from a human perspective, from you as a human being. And ask and answer in the chat, how does autonomy or lack of autonomy impact your motivation? And then as you do that, I'll ask the panelists to share. So Komal, Richa, if you can just introduce yourselves, share like a tiny bit about yourselves, and then also share about what autonomy means to you. Again, not so much from a coaching lens, but as a person.
Komal, did you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Richa.
Okay. All right. So hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be with you all this morning. I am Richa Chadha. I am based in Mountain View, California. I am a leadership and an executive coach, a mentor coach, a facilitator, and an organizational psychologist. I work with global leaders to help them navigate growth, change, purpose. And to answer your question, Tracy, I think if I take my coach's hat off, autonomy means having more of the inner permission to be me, right? It could be messy, it could be evolving, it could be brave, but it's about making choices for myself. And when I have that, when I do feel that I have that autonomy, I move from pressure to presence. So yeah, it's powerful.
Thank you so much,
Beautiful.
Richa. Thank you, Tracy. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. I'm Komal Smriti, and I'm also a coach and a leadership. I work in several spaces: leadership development, facilitation, relationship coaching is something which is very, very close to my heart. In fact, that's my lens for the overall coaching space. I started my coaching journey from India and then I moved to Canada, and now I'm based in Mississauga, which is near Toronto. And when I think of autonomy as a human, as an individual, and bringing in a little bit of that relational lens, uh, we are all intricately connected, interconnected. And so sometimes it's very difficult to figure out whether your thoughts are your own thoughts, your choices are your own choices, because we go on impacting each other at such subtle, minute, interconnected levels that it's difficult to make a choice. So when I think of autonomy, I think more as to, instead of our choices or our thoughts impacted by the needs, wants, desires, but more, or feelings, but what is it that is required in the moment? I think autonomy for me is an ability that allows us to respond to the situation, to respond to what the ask is in the moment, instead of it coming from somewhere else. And it's something very subtle, but I think as we go on discussing today, we'll unbundle it, open it up a little more.
I love that idea of that, what choice that needs to be made in the moment. And it really ties into what Richard was talking about, like going from pressure to presence, right? There's an idea of being able to have a little bit of a space, and then from that space, choosing what's needed. And maybe what's needed isn't only serving oneself, it's serving everything at that point in time. But that choice comes from the moment as opposed to something external. And I also see that Dan posted here that I put far more energy and creativity when I feel I have autonomy. It feeds responsibility versus accountability. And I love that. I'm a bit of a word geek. And so I love looking up the etymology of words. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. And autonomy comes from the Greek word auto, which means self, and then nomos, which means customs or law. So it really means self-law. And that resonates for me so much because when I was a child, my parents always often said, you always need to learn the hard way, like they were quite strict and we had quite a bit of rules. They actually called them rules when I was growing up, and I was always pushing against them because I needed to learn why for myself. I needed to be able to navigate the consequences in such a way that I really understood them from inside out. And so I think about that, even what Dan's saying about feeding responsibility versus accountability. Like accountability is almost like an external structure that is imposed on us, or sometimes even that we impose on ourselves to get things done. But it does tend to limit the way that we can adapt and respond in that moment and our presence in the moment, because it's not coming from within. It's not coming from an internal motivation. So let's take this into coaching for a moment. We've talked about how this impacts us personally, but we know that autonomy is necessary in a coaching session, right? Like we even just touched on the way that our motivation shifts and changes, the way that our presence, our choice, all of those things are more available to us when we feel that we have autonomy. But we also know that we as coaches need to hold space for that in a coaching session itself. So I'm just going to post another question in the chat for the audience. Please answer. and whatever comes up for you. But where in a coaching session, now you can put your coach's hats back on, by the way, if that appeals to you. We're talking about autonomy right now. So also answer from whatever perspective you want to. But where in a coaching session do you see autonomy as being most important? And then I'll ask you, I'd love us to talk about, our panelists, a little bit of a different perspective from that. And also, where do we often see it when all of us here, and I realize I forgot to introduce myself, but I'm with Coacharya. I'm a facilitator, an educator, a mentor, and also an alumni. I think we all are. And so Richa and Komal and myself, we're all coaches, but we've also all been and are mentor coaches as well. And so I thought I would shift this to look at where we often see autonomy being impacted, even by the most well-meaning of coaches. Who wants to take that first?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
So, primarily three areas come to mind, Tracy. So, first, of course, as I call it, when sometimes the coaches enter the fix it mode, and they put on a consultant's hat. So, when I see that happening, I see autonomy being hampered or being taken away from the client. So in that, we are subtly sending a message that I know better. So when we don't do that, when we allow for the client to expand in thoughts and perspectives, we allow the client to have the autonomy, right? And then another area which is very close to my heart is the silences and pauses. So when we see that, we allow the client to be, again, when I say like to dance in the moment, to be there, to think and to come up with any afterthoughts, etc. So that way we are allowing the client to enjoy the autonomy and to have that space, which I do not think we often get outside of our coaching sessions, where we can be ourselves and we can be autonomous and we have the liberty to think and say things. And third area is the goal setting, where probably sometimes coaches steer the clients towards, like, what feels productive, right, for us and versus what feels meaningful. So that sometimes I feel takes the agency away. So again, not doing that, we are allowing the client to enjoy the autonomy.
I love that, Richa, absolutely the way you put it. And earlier, when Tracy, you shared the correct etymology and definition of autonomy, it brought to me another idea which we call in Sanskrit Swadharma, which means knowing what is your dharma, what is your purpose, what you are here to do. And taking a cue from there, I go back to the experience of coaching people. And so what we usually notice is that the clients do come in the coaching conversations and sessions, sometimes with very, very clear goals. But then when we begin to talk and discuss, it opens up that to us and to them as well, as to, is it something really coming from deep within them, from is in their own voice, or is it something that they have picked up? So I think alongside, not advising or suggesting, I think as coaches, we also model and mirror autonomy in the conversation. So being very mindful and aware of, am I present with my autonomy? So if I am sensing that somehow what am I hearing from the client is not giving me a sense of autonomy, or that their thoughts are impacted by certain things rising up in them, then to be able to challenge them sufficiently and to share back the observations, I think is also something which helps bring in that autonomy. And I think it eventually boils down to us as coaches. The more we are present and grounded in our own autonomy, we are able to kind of notice, observe, and mirror that for the client as well. So, yes, being present, but then being present with our own sense of autonomy as well, I think is very important.
Yeah, that's really thought-provoking that you said that, and it had me thinking, because one of the things that I wanted to share is that I often see it impacted when coaches prioritize the markers over the client. So they start coaching the markers, or they start being more concerned about their performance, but making sure that the client gets to their outcome than what's actually opening up, what's like unraveling in the session. And so, Komal, when you talked about being able to be present with our own autonomy, I think that if we can be good with ourselves, and not feel this pressure to meet the client's expectations, then we're going to actually be able to open up and hold space for the client's autonomy as well. That's key, right? We always say it comes back to the being of the coach.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the goal, and yeah, the client has an idea of what their goals are. And sometimes that's because of external expectations. And so we can begin with autonomy right from that goal setting phase, where we're not just asking the client for the goal and the measure of success. Of course, those things are important, and that does give them autonomy over the what. But as soon as we start talking about their motivation behind the goal, what is it that's making this particularly meaningful to them? What is it? How are they feeling motivated to achieve this, right? There's something there that's drawing them towards that. And sometimes through that exploration, we start to see, or the client actually starts to see, more importantly, that maybe that in particular isn't holding as much meaning for them as something else. And then there's an option then for them to choose something different, which again comes to choice. I also want to touch on a couple of the things that the coaches said here. So choosing actions to take from the coaching session, what area topic to focus the session on, autonomy that needs to be present through the session, identifying goals, setting goals, identifying gaps, allowing silence. Silence is so key here. When we see coaches that are uncomfortable with silence, we can tell because the client's thinking, they're processing, like you can tell they're searching for the answer, and the coach jumps in and starts explaining the question or something else, and they've just limited the client's autonomy because they've broken their ability to be able to think something through because of the coach's own discomfort, which comes back to what you were saying, Komal, about we need to be good with our own autonomy. And I skipped past Guadalupe's comment on purpose because I really wanted to come back to that autonomy being the most important part in a coaching session. I think that's really beautifully said. That's the essence of coaching, right? It's really what differentiates coaching from other modalities. And so the question that I asked, being where do you see it as being a bit most important, was a trick question, but it was kind of coming to that it's important all throughout coaching.
Yes, because if we look at um, people who or clients who generally have a sense of that, okay, I think I can do this, or I think I am in control of something like this, they have very different kind of investigations than those who are already feeling as if I'm being controlled by certain situations and I do not have any control. So sometimes autonomy is not something which we bring in, but that is the end goal. That is the whole thing. That is the whole revelation that they need to come into, that they are autonomous beings. Yeah. So it kind of becomes a background, a backdrop of the entire conversation. And I love the way you connected the 3.3 competency to autonomy, right? Like why, asking why something is significant, why that goal is important, really, really pushes people to look within and see is it really for me? Is it really somewhere connected deep within my value system or not? Yeah, it's brilliant.
Perfect put. And one of the things that I wanted us to explore today, because it's close to my heart, is that we all see coaches that are so well-meaning and they really want to hold space for the client in unconditional positive regard. So there's acknowledgement, and it's done so beautifully at times, and yet sometimes acknowledgement can go the other way, and it can actually end up limiting client autonomy. But before we get into that, I want to ask the audience again, and first to sort of maybe qualify that when we can acknowledge a client, like you said, Komal, like it helps it almost becomes a thing in the background where autonomy becomes, it's maybe not the goal of coaching, but it ends up becoming a result of coaching in a sense, that can grow from it. And acknowledgement can really support that because it helps clients start to see, to believe in themselves, right? It can help clients start to see the choices that they have or the choices that they can make. Some of their strengths that they weren't aware of. So what I want to post into the chat for a moment and invite the coaches to answer is, when you acknowledge a client, what guides how you do it? And then I'll turn it over to the two of you for us to discuss, like, how does the way that we acknowledge the client support their autonomy, and how can it actually impact it?
So, Tracy, I feel like true acknowledgement, it actually mirrors the client's truth and not our interpretation of it. So that's where sometimes I see coaches lacking, that when we label the client's moment as, say, like powerful or brave, without checking in, we might actually unintentionally override their lived experience. So instead, but if we don't do that, what do we do? So instead, I like to ask, like, what was that like for you to say that out aloud? Or what part of that feels important to hold on to? Something like that, rather than me labeling it as, wow, wonderful, or like, that was brave, that's so powerful of you. So, this for me, it keeps their meaning at the center and then lets them decide what matters most versus me labeling it.
Richa brought me back right to the beginning days of the coaching. I heard myself, exclaiming and getting impressed sometimes, and then saying, "Oh, I really love what you said," or "I really like what you said." And as we grow, we realize that actually, I'm bringing in my opinion, I'm bringing in my judgment of, what is likable and what is not likable. Instead, now how it's shaped and it transformed for me is just seeing them for who they are, and seeing them in context of who do they want to be. Because sometimes I find that whatever they want to be, they already are, they're just not seeing themselves like that. And so if I'm able to see that in the conversation, I would just pick it up and show it back to them and say, "Oh, I heard this and I heard this, and this is what who you want to be, but you already are doing that. What does it mean?" Because I figured that most of the times we go through living the life, we go through the motions, not being aware of what is happening, who we are showing up as, who we are being. So I think, to me, that acknowledgement in that moment is to hold a mirror to the client and say, "This is how you're showing up. This is who you're being. What does it bring to you?" So I think more than me saying, "Wow," it's important for them to say, "Wow, oh, yeah, yeah, you're right. I'm already doing this, or I'm already there." Yeah.
And Komal, we've all done that. So you were not alone in appreciating and validating. We've all been there, and we
Yeah.
see coaches, and then we're like, yeah, you'll get over it. You'll understand what it is. Rather than appreciating and validating, you just need to acknowledge. And as you rightly said, just pull up the mirror and show it.
I still find myself sometimes slipping into it where I want to say, like, someone said something and I want to say beautiful, you know, that just comes so naturally to me. Wow, that's beautiful. And I mean it when I'm saying it, but I'm not explaining
Yeah.
what I found beautiful about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll hear coaches that say that almost after every time the client shares. So after a while, it doesn't, maybe the coach is feeling it's genuine, but to the client, like even to the mentor, as we're listening, we're like, is the coach really meaning this? Because it's coming so often. And so it's not that we want to be sparing with that, but we want to just, again, like you said, it's a mirror, right? So if we're finding something has really stood out to us as coaches, like say what it is, or bring the hidden talent that the client doesn't see yet, right? Like the client is saying that they're not organized, let's say, and yet they talk about a series of things that they've done that seem quite organized. And we say, you know, you say that you don't have the ability to get it together, and yet you just talked about this, and that seems quite structured to me. How does it look to you? And that last part, which each of you highlighted, is so important. We're not just sharing it as an observation and then leaving it out there. We're asking the client, how do they see it? How do they think about it? And if we're actually sharing an observation, and I've seen coaches do this too, I see you as the type of person that, right? Well, that's a big conclusion that you're drawing there. And even if you mean it in the most positive way, maybe the client doesn't see themselves that way. And so if you're not following it up with a check-in with the client, giving them the opportunity to agree or disagree, and that's a very important aspect of PCC marker 4.4, that we offer something to the client, ideally with some permission, which again is about the autonomy, and then give them the option to agree or disagree. If we're not giving them that, then we're not supporting them in being able to voice whether or not that stands out for them.
Yeah. And it's very interesting you bring that point, Tracy, because sometimes coaches are so afraid of sharing something and say, oh, but I'm not supposed to advise or I'm not supposed to bring in something of my own. And I feel like, no, that's another level of the client practicing their autonomy because, and it's also a mark of trust that somebody feels like they can deny what you're offering them. And so I think, so I tell the coaches that, be courageous. You are here in service of the client. So if you're observing something, be authentic and courageous, share it back and allow them to, and hold a space for them to completely say that, no, this is not what it is. Because when somebody says, no, this is not what, which means they are actually in that space of autonomy, and that could also be a test of it. Yeah. So I love that.
Absolutely. I'm looking over here. See, I just did it absolutely. So it becomes such an
I also
unconscious
did.
response.
I love that.
Yes.
We're humans.
We are human.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the comments here. So listening, being attentive, being present is the most powerful way to acknowledge the client. Keeping in mind that I will be more valuable as an observer than as a confirming voice. Absolutely. I want to circle back around to that. And what guides me when I acknowledge the client is their authentic process of what matters to them, not just what sounds impressive. And that's another really, really important point. It's a pause. They allowed a boundary. They voiced an emotion. That's so beautiful, Bismillah. When acknowledgement's rooted in their world, it becomes a mirror, not a spotlight. And that's the key, right? Like we as coaches aren't acknowledging the client for maybe something really stood out to us, but I try to let my felt senses guide me. Like I'll actually get goosebumps or like I'll feel something in my body that is so connected to what the client shared. And then I use that to mirror back what that was, as opposed to what I think is valuable. And those two things are very, very different.
Yeah.
Rich, I see that you've unmuted.
I muted because I was coughing, but but I resonate with everything you said, Tracy. If it is authentic, and as Bismillah rightly said, I was reading his comments actually. So I love the last part, which is when acknowledgement is rooted in their world, it becomes a mirror, not a spotlight. I love it. I might borrow it.
Yeah. And that's the other area that acknowledgement can go wrong, is when the coach then puts their stamp of approval. And we've all seen that. The coach shares something that they've seen with the client, and they'll say, I think that's wonderful because. And it's like, okay, so now you've taken something that you've seen in the client, which is perhaps is really wonderful, but then let the client say why it is. But then the coach is saying, I think it's wonderful because it's, when people can do this, then this is available to them. And then you're making it again all about you as the coach and not about the client and what seeing that in themselves means to them and makes possible to them.
And sometimes we often share our examples as well. I've also noticed, or this has happened with me as well in my career, in my life. So then you're bringing the spotlight onto you, and it's not about the client anymore.
Exactly. One more thing I wanted to touch on before we move out of acknowledgement is that it's really important that we acknowledge the client's insights. We'll see that there's stuff opening up for the client. They're coming to an awareness. Sometimes they'll even say, I've just realized, or I'm just becoming aware of, or I'm starting to see this differently. And then the coach is like, okay, great. So what are the next steps that we can take, because they're like, okay, good, we're past the awareness stage. Now we can start closing the session. Of course, I'm guessing what the coach is thinking, but there isn't a sense of the coach then supporting the client to say, what is it that's opening up for them? What is it that they're seeing differently? This is what helps give the client confidence in themselves, that they realize that they're starting to be able to see their own insights, their own challenges, their own motivations, like all of these deeper things. It's helping, like we talked about, bring that back into the background, or keep that in the background. Keep autonomy as like a foundation of coaching. So we want to be very present as coaches to what's opening up for the client and acknowledging that, instead of being so concerned about, again, following a structure, or yeah, feeling like we need to
Tracy,
ask the next coaching question. Yes.
I like calling it anchoring the insight, and it's great that you mentioned,
Mm,
because when we skip it, we almost skip the most important part of the coaching session. So when you see an insight and you do not anchor it, you do not make the change permanent. It's just like, okay, from here to here we moved, but then what happened? What shifted? What did make the move possible? So that's where we come in, we anchor the insight, and as you said, we could ask questions like, what shifted for you when you said that? Like, I noticed that change. What was going on? Rather than, okay, now how do we move to the next steps? So, very important to keep an eye out for any of the nonverbal cues that we might be seeing, or when we see those shifts happening in the conversation, and to anchor it right then and there.
I came
yeah.
across a slight different way of, but the same thing that we are talking about is that client's insight. And it happened in one of the supervision session that I was doing, where the client has been kind of going on a ramble, a big ramble, a very long monologue. And there is so much of awareness and insight happening in that long session, but the client is in a mode where they're just going on and on and on and just rushing through the important nuggets that they are bringing out in their own conversation. And the coach is like, oh, I I would let the client speak, and then after a while, the coach kind of gets lost in that word jumble. And so I thought, we do have that permission to interject, to interfere, or to stop the client when there is a specific purpose. And the specific purpose is to help the client pause and slow down a little bit and pay attention to those nuggets that they are bringing in the conversation. So it's not always that. Sometimes as coaches, we are in a hurry, so we skip over and not anchor the insights. And sometimes we notice and we feel like, oh, we're not supposed to stop them in between because they are going on in their process. But if that process is just running away from where they eventually want to get to, then we need to stop them. And that is also accessible to us as coaches.
Yeah, and that's again leaving them with choice, right? And I'm going to actually post that into the chat because we've talked a little bit about how we do that. Richa, you gave an example as well as of a question that helps anchor the insight, I think is words are the words that you used. And then Komal, like presenting to them when the session might be running away. So what does a question, I'm going to ask the coaches in the chat, what does a question that supports client autonomy sound like to you? And we'll turn it over as well to the panelists to discuss that. How do the observations that we make or the questions that we ask either support the client's sense of choice or limit it?
I feel like the I'm a big fan of words and questions because those are probably the only things in this digital age that we are sharing with our clients and not a physical space. So the questions that we ask, they shape the field of possibility, right? So a narrow question can limit or box a client versus a spacious one which invites choice. So autonomy, as we talked before. So instead of asking something like, what will you do about this? Or like, what do your next steps look like? Subtle language shifts for me, and they could be like, what feels like the right next direction to follow? Or, for example, what's calling your attention now? So, as I said, the subtle language shifts from should to could, or like how will you solve it, or how will you go about it, to how do you want to be with it? What do you want to do with it? So, I feel that these things, the tiniest change in our tone, in our words, in our questions, they can give clients more space and the permission to lead their own process.
Yeah. For me, I think whenever I ask a question which is specific, which brings the client closer to themselves, look at their own, is what I think helps boost that autonomy, like asking questions which are specifically about them, like, what does it mean to you? How does it look like to you? What does it make you think? How would you like that to happen? So every time we bring a conversation back to the client, to them, to their perspective, their feelings, their thoughts, their opinions, their experience, I think in those moments, we help them be more in-centered and kind of promotes more autonomy for them. Like sometimes they have an habit of talking in general terms, like, oh, generally this happened. Sure, fair enough. How does it happen to you? Right? Or what would you do in that situation? So that you, I think, is kind of works as an anchor to bring in that autonomy.
Bringing it back to the you of the client, opening up the questions so that we're not boxing them in, seeing some things here from the coaches. May I invite you to share the choices that appear to you? So that's a lovely wide open question there. If I understand correctly, you're saying X, that's an interesting insight. Can you tell me more about how that makes you feel? Now I'm gonna talk a minute about open and closed-ended questions for a moment, because there's an idea we know that PCC marker 7.6 says that coach uses primarily open-ended questions one at a time. I might not be quoting that verbatim. That primarily is important. That means that most of our questions we want to be open-ended because it does what Richa said, it opens things up instead of narrowing down, right? And yet there's times that a closed-ended question is appropriate. Anytime that it's leaving the client with a choice. Anytime, let's say that a client is feeling, we've noticed something that seems like it might be a challenging emotion, perhaps it's an energy that's come up with a client, we've shared it back to the client. And then if we just say like, what is that, what are you feeling right now? Okay, yeah, that can be powerful, but maybe the client doesn't actually want to talk about that energy. So giving them that choice, like I've noticed this, maybe ask them like, did you notice this? So they give them the option of saying yes or no, or would it help to explore this in context of your goal? And then the client can actually say no, as opposed to, how does this feeling impact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which could put them in a space of feeling like they don't have a choice, but to go somewhere that they weren't ready to go. And so for that reason, inviting a client, and that invitational language is really important there. We want to invite the client to share something with us, or invite the client to respond yes or no to something. When we say, just tell me more, it sometimes tends to be bringing the control back to the coach. So we just really want to be aware of that. How can we stay invitational with the client as opposed to us telling them where to go?
Yeah. And this brings me to one of our conversations, Tracy, and which was like a very, very powerful conversation for me, where you once named a feeling and which kind of opened up. It kind of allowed me the permission to feel that feeling and stay in that for a moment, right? And that kind of invokes another thought, which is, when we are in a coaching conversation with a client and we are leading, knowing that the client is an autonomous being, they have the power. And this is also kind of discussed in the beginning, that listen, this is a session for you, this is a conversation for you, and this is an assumption that I'm going to make here, that you can say no, you can say yes, you have all the freedoms in this conversation. So then when we are sharing something, and even if it's a little close-ended, we are taking a chance, knowing that if it doesn't sit well with them, they'll say no, or they'll say yes. It's like, instead of trying to make an effort to create autonomy for them, we are leading with an assumption that they are autonomous and just inviting them to take that space. And so there, I think we'd also have a permission to be, or to say certain things sometimes, and just observe and notice, how do they respond? Are they exercising their autonomy or not? Because like you said, sometimes when we can observe and sense that maybe our little push, little gentle nudge can open up something for them.
Yeah. And that's where non-attachment has to come in as well, because if they don't want it to open up something, then we're giving them that choice freely. And we're not getting attached to them saying no and feeling, oh my God, then thrown off. What are they thinking of me? I don't know where to go next. We're just, okay, letting that go.
Yeah.
And I see this happen sometimes, even if a coach asks a question and the client doesn't understand it, then the coach will feel the need to explain the question to the client again, as opposed to just allowing the client to go with it where they would have. So in other words, the coach presents a client and presents a question, and the client takes it into a different direction, and the coach actually says, actually, what I was asking was this. It's like, the client's moved on by now. Let go of that question. Be where the
Yeah.
client is in this moment.
Go with their flow.
Yeah, and sometimes
Yes.
they would, or like even we would back in the day, bring those questions back. Like, I asked this before and you did not answer it, but now I want to ask it again. And then that's where that marker comes into picture, which is the coach doesn't have any attachment. And it becomes coach centric because you are too much in your head to bring all of those points back again on the table. And again, the key reason for that is you want to solve a problem. You are not letting go of the what. So maybe just
Yes.
moving on and dancing in the moment with the client would probably allow us to let go of the attachment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Going with their
Verinder, I'm
flow.
looking at one thing in chat. Verinder is written, does it means detached curiosity? And I would say curiosity is possible only in that detached form. If there is any attachment, it's not curiosity, it's just a drama.
I like that. I mean, if you think about it, right? Whenever I have to think about curiosity, I have to think of children because I think they embody curiosity in such a beautiful way. And that's why whenever anyone says, "Oh, I'm just not a curious person," you learned not to be a curious person, right? Like we've all as children started off with this beautiful curiosity, and it's been hopefully not literally but metaphorically slapped out of us by the adults in our world because we say things sometimes that are maybe we ask too many questions or we ask questions that aren't appropriate, and so we learn over time it's not safe to be curious. And yet, when you look at a child's curiosity, that curiosity is not attached to what happened 10 minutes ago. It's about whatever shiny thing is happening in that moment. The kid's moving from thing to thing and getting curious about it. And that's kind of how we want to be as coaches within the structure of a coaching session. And of course, with the understanding that it always has to be serving the client's form and movement. We're not getting curious about things that aren't going to help, that aren't related to their goal or that are satisfying, again, our own curiosity. The curiosity, again, needs to be, like Richa said, it's about their flow. So we're curious about what something is meaning to them, how they're processing it or feeling about it, because we think maybe they don't know either. And so then we're
Yeah.
opening up the conversation of not knowing, not just because we don't know.
A funny statement comes to my mind because we've all grown up listening to that word, curiosity killed the cat. And someday I confronted somebody, are you a cat? And they're like, no. I said, then it's not going to kill you. As long as you're not a cat, you can be curious.
I love that. And cats have 9 lives. So anyways, it takes a while for the cat to
Anyways,
die. So since we're actually coming towards the end of our webinar, it seems appropriate to move to the end of the coaching session as well and look at how we support autonomy there. And I'm just going to pop that into the chat for the coaches, and then we can also talk about that as well. How do we see sometimes that coaches end up taking over at the end of the conversation where they've been supporting autonomy throughout, and then it just shifts at the end?
Komal, do you want to take this one?
so how do we support clients to stay in ownership when designing actions or accountability? Um, First of all, do not ever skip this conversation. Because sometimes in the coaching conversations, you feel like, oh, the client has gotten what they wanted, and there's no need of this. Or maybe sometimes we are not good at binding the conversation well, and it feels like a little more transactional, but it is not. It's actually you know the essence where the client really wanted to come to, right? And so being very, very deliberate about it, and even if it's something that we need to bring in one question, two questions, just checking in, even if it's not like a long deliberate conversation, but checking in that what does it look like for the client, what would work for them, how does it look in their life, in their schedule after the conversation, after the session, and being okay with that, I think.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel coaches take over when they are overly focused on outcomes, like rushing to get a SMART goal, we say these days. So I would invite clients to design their own success measures, and I'll ask something like, what would progress feel like? Or maybe not only look like, what would it feel like? So that they again have the autonomy to design their progress their own way. Or something like, what's one small action that would honor your energy this week? Or that would honor the conversation that we have had today. So staying in partnership until the end. And I often say, like, partner with the client to even close the session rather than saying that, okay, it's time, let's close the session. I'll see you next week. I would say, how would you like to close the session? Or we have about 4 or 5 minutes left. How would you like to use this time so that it feels meaningful to you? And we were talking about close-ended questions, Tracy. And as much as I tell coaches not to ask them, but you were absolutely right. Like there are sometimes we do need to ask close-ended questions. And when we anchor insights, sometimes I like to give them that autonomy or like, remind them of their autonomy rather. Like, do you want to explore next steps or we can pause here? So they have the choice. Like if you just want to pause and soak in, that's fine. You want to explore next steps, we can do that. So I feel it's about co-creating from the client's pace and not from my urgency as a coach. So yeah, partnering till the end. That's the mantra.
Yeah, and you're talking about the urgency as a coach, and I can really relate to that because one of the mistakes that I made early in the coaching days is I would feel the need to summarize for the client everything that they said that they were
Yeah.
going to do, everything that came up for them. Because I was like, I want them to leave this session remembering everything, And so I would just bring all the key points around. And maybe that was also a way for me to show I was really listening. But then we're taking away the client's autonomy. So again, ask the client, like, would it be helpful to reflect for a moment and summarize what's standing out from you from our conversation right now? And then you're giving the client the choice to do that, first of all. And secondly, then
Yeah.
the client can reflect on what's really stood out to them. And maybe they'll say, did I forget anything? And then we could bring in something that we noticed that seemed to be they seem to be connecting to at some deeper level. The other thing that I've noticed happens is the client is so excited to do whatever it is that they're doing, and they're just like, I can't wait to set my alarm and go for that run, right? And then the coach says, how are you going to hold yourself accountable for that? So again, we want to give the clients choice, right? They've just shown all this energy. And then we're just basically almost suggesting to them, oh, maybe you won't do it. Maybe you won't wake up. So how are you going to be accountable? Instead, we can say, I just see so much energy and commitment as you're talking about that. Would it be helpful to explore accountability, or are you feeling like you've got this, And so give the client the choice. And maybe they would say, actually, yeah, like I am really excited, but maybe I'll also like text a friend and say, whatever. So again, the point is that we want to offer that. And it's the same as coaches. I've seen coaches um, offer the clients their support, which is really lovely. But again,
I
that's
was
not
going to say the
supporting.
same thing.
Yes, you
Yeah.
you please, you
No,
please
no, no, no.
say
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
it. Yeah, it's the client. It's up to the client to determine what support that they need.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll ask the coach, hey, would you mind checking in with me in a week? But when the coach offers their support, they're keeping the client tied, like that umbilical
Yeah.
cord is there, right?
So you're limiting the client to only your support rather than giving them the option, what would support you in this journey? What would support you in this progress? And it could be anything. And they should have the autonomy and the agency to decide and not us, like, oh, can I check in with you? I understand the intentions are all noble, but what we are doing is we are limiting the client, we are boxing them.
Yeah. micromanaging I'm
See a
seeing in here.
beautiful question by Heba in the chat box. She says, what if the coach feels lost and struggles to take ownership or prioritize their goals? Would promoting autonomy still be effective in such a case? I would say yes, because sometimes these are habits, and especially for a lot of people who grew up in not very autonomous conditions, we tend to always look at others or the situations to push us, or because we always prioritize only what is urgent and not look at other important things. But eventually, at some point, they need to change. So I think do notice if you notice some pattern, because that opens up another area of exploration and awareness for the client as to what is within them which makes them feel like they cannot prioritize, what comes in the way, what kind of thought process or what kind of way of looking at things is stopping them from doing that. And that in itself, I think, could be quite a revelatory conversation for them. And always knowing that as a coach, what is your role? Because if you become a teacher, or if you become a mentor, or if you become, I would say, a cheerleader, that's a different role, right?
Yeah, and it also comes down to what we talk about even in the chemistry session with the client, right? Asking them about their learning styles, their preferences in terms of um, designing actions, how things work for them, like how accountability, all of these things can happen in the chemistry session, so we can give the client the option to voice what works for them and what doesn't as well. All right, so we are nearing the close of our session, and in keeping with what Richa talked about just a little earlier, I want to invite each of you, Richa and Komal, to share how you'd like to close our time together today.
I love it. So I am reminded again of the fact that autonomy isn't something we grant, right? It's something we protect for our client. So, as coaches, our job, I feel, is only to create space where clients remember that they already have the answers. They are whole, complete, resourceful, and they have the authority to shape their lives. It's how we bring it up and how we protect their autonomy. So that's one reminder or an insight, if you will, I'm walking away from our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm also, I think, of course, took away it's a wonderful, enjoyable space for me to share and then listen and learn from our mutual sharings and reflections, and of course the questions that everybody is putting in their thoughts. It brings me back again to the idea of seeing what we see, or how we see is what creates the reality, is to just really lean in and start seeing the person in front of us as an autonomous being. And then we would notice a whole lot of things emerging from that conversation or their presence that will show us. And then we need to just show it back to them that this is how you're being, or this is how it's working for you. Like somebody says, where attention goes, energy flows. So if we want people to be more autonomous, I think we need to start seeing in what ways are they being autonomous already. Even if it's like a slight sliver of light, I think if we give it more energy, it'll grow. But somewhere deep down, it must always be there.
Mm. That's what I'm taking away today, something very similar, that deep down it's always there, and reflecting on what autonomy means to me really helped me reconnect with the value that it holds for me personally, and how I need to be in the end responsible for making sure that I'm being fully autonomous. And by doing that, I'm actually holding space for others to do that as well. So that's what I'm taking away to reflect on today. Thank you, everyone. Wonderful conversation. Thanks, Richa, Komal, all the coaches that attended for your sharing. And we'll
Thank
see you
you.
in a month. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was lovely having this conversation. Thank you, Tracy, for facilitating. Thank you, Komal. And let's keep these amazing conversations going, guys. It was amazing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.